A lot of people, if you asked them, what do they want to do with their free time? Like, what would be their dream for it? A lot of them are going to give you a similar answer. They say that they want to have a weekend getaway in some location. Now, whether that's on a lake, on a stream, in the mountains, in the woods, at the coast, that part changes, but so many people want that weekend getaway, that dream property where they can just escape. And again, whether it's a weekend or a month or a whole summer or a winter, doesn't matter. The thing that they run into, though, is they're not quite sure how to go from buying the land to building the property and kind of making that dream come true. So that's what we're going to do in this video. We're going to talk about how to make that dream come true. What are your options for buying that land, building that cabin, and how to not lose your mind, how to not lose all of your money, and how to not lose hope during that process. All right, so let's say you're driving through the Texas Hill Country, or maybe it's Colorado, it doesn't matter. You find the perfect piece of property. It's exactly what you want. It's got the view you want, it's waterfront, whatever. 10 acres, it's ideal. And you want to jump on it, and the biggest mistake that I see all the time, this is the first mistake, is people go and buy that land in cash. They think, I've got the money, let's go ahead and do it. But what they don't realize is at that point, they've taken a lot of their build budget and they've tied it up into that piece of property without fully understanding how they're going to get it back out. Because what a lot of people don't understand is that the banks that you're going to get your loan from on a project like this is not, Rocket Mortgage and things like that. These are local banks, and they treat buying the land and the construction and then the mortgage afterwards as three completely different things. So you've got to understand how the bank sees those things, how they want to see them sequenced, and how you're going to go about doing that and staying liquid enough that you can actually see your project through all the way to the end. So let's talk about land loans first. I said, don't rush to buy it in cash, so you're going to need a land loan. And they sound pretty flexible because you can go to probably 4 or 5 different local banks and talk to them, and they all have a little bit different way to do things. Here's the problem, though. First of all, they're going to require a large down payment. At this point, a lot of them I'm seeing are 25 and 30% down. They're also going to have a high interest rate. If home mortgages are 7%, land loans are typically going to be around 8.25 to 8.5 on average. The other thing that they're all going to have is they're going to have a balloon payment, and you're not going to be able to amortize them over a long period of time. Amortization is the term that it takes to pay off a loan, right? Most house loans are 30-year term. That's a 30-year amortization period. Well, on a land loan, you're probably going to get 15 years. You might be able to get 20, but you're not going to be able to carry the land loan that long. You're going to have to pay it off with what they call a balloon payment. And that's typically going to be somewhere between 3 and 5 years, even though those are a little bit negotiable. But if you're not ready to build before that balloon payment comes up, well, now you're stuck with a piece of land that you're going to have to refinance at current rates with additional closing costs. So it's going to cost you even more. So when you're getting a land loan, you have to understand, okay, this thing's coming due. I need to be ready to build my cabin before I have to refinance the land loan, because then at that point, if you're ready to build, you can refinance it into what's called a construction loan. Remember, I told you, banks are going to have basically 3 different ways that they see this: land loan, construction loan, and then the permanent mortgage on the end. So you've got to be ready to get to that construction loan phase before the balloon comes due on that land note. And because of that, one of the things you're going to want to ask your lender when you're talking to them about these loans is, do you offer construction financing in addition to land financing? Or are there some places that are only land financing? It may be worth talking to them also, do you offer a permanent mortgage solution at the end? Because it would be a lot easier to do the deal just with one loan officer, one bank. They know you, they know your history at that point, than having to go search different banks. So have these conversations up front. Make sure that bank has the ability to convert from the land loan to the construction loan and then to that permanent financing at the end. Now, the second thing that I want to talk about is kind of the cash myth. If you can afford to buy the land, do your construction, all cash, you don't have to take a loan out on everything, great. You probably don't need to watch the end of this video. But if that's not you, you have to figure out how you're going to utilize your cash. If you put all of your cash into the land, and then you have to go take a note out for for your construction part. Okay, you can do that because when you go and pay off the land, you're going to get credit for the value of the land. in that construction loan. So you're probably not going to have to bring additional cash to the table. But if you want to do extra things outside of the scope of your construction loan, okay, let's say that for your construction loan, you're going to build a cabin, you're going to put in the infrastructure, and that's your construction loan. But, well, you know what? I also want to build a stock pond. Okay, you've got a beautiful piece of property and you want to put in a 2 acre, some people call it lakes, in the country we call them ponds or tanks. If you want to do that, okay, that might cost you $15,000 or $20,000, but if you don't have it in the scope of your construction loan, because you probably can't put it in the scope of your construction loan, you're going to have to come cash out of pocket for that. Well, if all of your cash is tied up in the land, you don't have cash in hand. So a good rule of thumb that I tell people is try to keep, call it 20 to 30% of your total budget liquid, if at all possible. That way, when things come up, there's little add-ons you want to do, you can do that. Because keep in mind, if your construction loan and your land is going to cost you $500,000, well, what happens if you go over? Sometimes you can get the lender, the bank, to give you a cushion in your budget if the appraisal works, right? So you may be able to get 10% over, you might be able to get $550 for it. But if the appraisal doesn't work and your end project is only going to be worth $500,000, the bank's only going to give you $500,000. So as you're going through construction, if you want to add something special, okay, you want to put in a really nice outdoor cooking area and fire pit that you hadn't thought about, or you want to build a nice seating area patio with this view that you hadn't thought about, well, you're going to have to do, again, cash out of pocket because you're not going to be able to go over on your loan. All right. If, again, your land is tied up in, or your cash is tied up in the land, you can't do that. So again, you don't necessarily want to do, have all of your cash in your land. You want to keep some of that cash around for the extra things that you didn't think about when you were designing that place. Third thing I want to talk about are, you can do one-time closes, you can do two-time closes, you could potentially do a three-time close. The biggest difference between them, a close is, okay, if you buy the piece of property, you close on it and you pay closing costs, okay? When you close on your construction loan, you're going to close on it. There's additional loan costs. When you go to permanent financing, you're going to close on it. There's additional loan costs. So if you can do a one-time close, you have one set of fees that are associated with the build, right? So if you have your land, you have your construction ready to go, your builder's ready to go, and you have a lender that will convert it into a permanent mortgage at the end, you could potentially do a one-time close and only have, title fees, origination fees, stuff like that for one time. If you don't have your ducks in a row, in other words, you don't have construction ready to go, or if your bank doesn't offer a permanent financing at the end, then you are going to have to, or maybe be forced to do either a two-time close or a three-time close. All right, that's fine, but keep in mind that every time you close, you're probably going to be in the neighborhood of about 2% in closing costs. So if you buy a $400,000 piece of property, you're going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $8,000 in closing costs. If your total construction project is $400,000, another $8,000 in construction costs. I hope I'm doing the numbers on that right. But anyway, the point stands. If you have the ability to do a construction loan and a land loan and the permanent financing all in one, do a one-time close, it's going to save you money. And that's something that you've got to talk to your lender about up front. And again, you've got to have your contractor on board up front. You got to have all your pricing on board. Like, everything has to be done before you, before you go to move to buy the land. Keep in mind, if you're doing that here, let me know. I can, here being in Texas, I can put you in contact with the contractors. I can put you in contact with lenders and all of that other stuff. If you're doing it in another state, reach out to me. Chances are I probably know those people in that other state also, and I'm more than happy to help you do that. But the point being, you've got to have your vision taken care of, all lined out before you start, if you're wanting to do that one-time close and save that extra money on the closing costs. Some of the things that you've got to keep in mind as you're deciding between one-time close, two-time close, and things like that. First of all, you're going to have periods that you're going to be able to keep the loans. Like I told you, if you're doing a land loan, you're going to have a balloon payment at maybe 3 or 5 years, potentially 7 years, depending on the bank. If you're doing construction, your construction loan is usually going to be good for a period of a year, unless you're you're in a state where, construction usually takes longer than a year, that's a longer one, okay? So if your construction gets delayed for some reason, then what you may have to do is extend the construction loan period. You may have to ask them for another year. Okay, you can do that, but they're going to go to the current interest rate. So if you're in an environment that interest rates are stable or dropping, okay, not a bad thing to, to go back and get a little bit more time. And also in that same scenario, it's not a bad thing necessarily to have multiple closings, a 2-time or a 3-time close, because if you can look out and say, I really think interest rates are going to drop over the next 4 years, then okay, maybe it makes more sense to not lock it up all at once, because if you do a one-time close where the end product is going to be permanent financing, if you do it in today's dollars, it's going to be the interest rate when you start. That's the documentation that you're going to sign. So if your interest rate at the start of construction is 7%, that's going to be your mortgage rate at the end of it when you go to permanent financing, okay? If you think interest rates are going to be dropping over time, well, maybe you want to do a 2-time close. If you think that interest rates are going to be rising over time, I'm going to do everything possible to get a 1-time close so I don't have to go convert to permanent financing at the end and then be hit with the shock of, oh crap, my interest rate now is 8% when I could have had 6% at the beginning. So these are things that you have to think through. And again, part of this is having a competent mortgage officer who's willing to have these conversations with you and talk through these options. If you're talking to somebody that seems like you're wasting their time or something like that, go find somebody else to talk to. I mean, these are big decisions. These are big numbers. Make sure that you have somebody who's on your side who feels like they're kind of your best friend through this process when it comes to the loan officer, when it comes to your realtor, when it comes to the contractors. You need to vet these people and make sure you're comfortable with them and make sure that they're okay answering questions without anything guaranteed for them at the end of it. Okay, the fourth part of this is we need to talk about draw schedules. When you get into the construction loans are paid out on draws, okay? Generally, if you bought land with a construction loan, the first draw is going to pay for the land. The second draw might be paying for engineering, might be paying for septic design and install, things like that. Might be your foundation installation. That would be your second draw. Third draw might be plumbing. Fourth draw might be framing and roof and dry-in. So every stage of construction is going to have a draw associated with it. Now, the reason it's called a draw is because they're going to take the money that you got from the bank, your loan, and they're drawing that money out to pay off a bill, right? When you're paying your note, when you're paying your monthly mortgage on it in a construction loan, generally speaking, you're only going to be paying interest and you're only going to be paying the amount that's been lent out already. So if you have a loan for $700,000, but the first $200,000 went to the land, okay, you're going to be paying interest only on that land, or at least that's the way it should work. Make sure you ask your lender about that. If your lender's going to make you pay basically a permanent mortgage on the whole thing and it's just going to escalate every time, you might want to try to find a different lender. Another big thing about draws is, and again, you want to have these conversations up front. You want to talk with your contractor to find out if they've ever worked with a specific lender and see how they feel about that lender. Likewise, if you're talking to a lender and a contractor, ask your lender, because it's going to be a local person, ask them if they've ever worked with that contractor. Do they have good things to say? Do they have bad things to say? The lenders that I use for this, they will tell you if they're not comfortable with the contractor that you've picked. And sometimes lenders will flat out say, I won't fund the project if it is that contractor. So again, have those conversations and make sure that everybody's comfortable with it. Make sure if the lender says, look, we're going to pay draws only once a month, 30th of the month or the 1st of the month, make sure your contractor's okay with that, and also make sure you're okay with it, because if your contractor's got a draw request out and they're sitting there waiting 15 days or 21 days to actually get their check, guess what's not happening during that time? Construction on your property. So you have to find that lender and that contractor that you're comfortable with, that your timeline works, because again, if you're waiting 3 weeks between draw requests, guess what else is happening? It's elongating your timeline. So again, if you've got a 12-month timeline for your construction loan and you're wasting 3 weeks every time you're waiting on a draw, okay, you could get to the end of that timeline, and then again, that throws numbers in out of whack. You're going to pay additional closing costs when you have to refi that construction loan out. You know, you may have a higher interest rate at that point. So staying on that timeline and making sure those draws are done in a timely manner is really, really key to the whole process. The fifth thing a lot of people don't understand are the difference between hard costs and soft costs, and whether or not your lender will allow you to pay for soft costs with your loan. Okay, hard costs are things like electric install, septic install, building the cabin, infrastructure stuff, putting in a driveway. Those are hard costs. Soft costs are things like architectural design, engineering, sitting down with designers. You know, I'm thinking interior designers as well as exterior and potentially landscape designers and stuff like that. Okay, those are soft costs, and not all lenders will actually not all lenders will pay for them. But I do know lenders that I can come out of pocket cash up front and say I've got, you know, $30,000 in soft costs between engineering and architecture and design work and all of that other stuff. The lenders that I work with, once I go under contract, or once I sign the paperwork on the loan, I can actually get a draw from them for that $30,000 in soft costs to put that money back into my bank account for overages. So again, conversations with all of these people, make sure, hey lender, if I pay for soft costs up front and I give you receipts, can I take a draw out on that so I can recoup that cash and keep it into my account for, you know, unforeseen things? Again, conversations are everything, and if you've got a lender that is not answering these questions or doesn't know how to answer them, go find a different lender. You know, reach out to me. I'll put you in contact with a good one. Now, what I want to talk about is sequencing. And by the way, in the comments below, there's a link where you can go download the ebook checklist for basically building your weekend getaway. Right? Everything I'm talking about in here, checklist form in a booklet. Download it and use it. You know, and let me know if it helps you out. But here's kind of the sequencing that I would do personally, or that I am doing actually, because I'm doing this myself right now. The first thing is you have got to be meticulous on making sure you understand what your dream vision is for a property before you ever go get a loan on anything, before you ever buy anything, before you ever meet with an architect. You need to understand what you want. So if it's just you, okay, have brainstorming sessions with yourself. If you've got a spouse, significant other, family, whatever, make sure that you know what your dream vision looks like. That's number one. The second step in this is then go find the land, okay? Don't waste your time looking at the cheapest land. I've got several videos on why cheap land usually isn't a great idea. This is a dream of yours. Go find your dream property. Don't cut corners on this. Don't take shortcuts, because even if you build the perfect cabin, but it's on a shitty piece of land and you don't like going out there, you're not going to be happy. Make sure that second step, buying that piece of land, you put a ton of effort into it, and don't take shortcuts. Don't buy something because it seems like a good deal, or sorry, there's a big log here. Don't buy something because it seems like a great deal, or it's just good enough. Make sure you buy what you actually want. Then when you've identified that land, and I said buy that land up front. Okay, this is how I would do it. Then after you've got that land identified, as you're going through your due diligence and as you're getting ready to close on it, start identifying what you want to build on there. Look, I know you have an idea of what it is. You probably have a floor plan, but you never know quite what that design is going to look like until you actually have the property. And then at that point, you're going to engage architects, you're going to engage designers, and engineering could be different depending on the slope or what the topography of it is. So at that point, really hone in what that design looks like, what the layout's going to look like. Have your architect out to the property if at all possible, so that they can get a feel for it. Architects, if you don't have somebody that gets excited to go out and look at a design site, find another architect, because look, this is your dream. You need to have an architect, designers, all these people that are really, really excited about the project. That's how you know you're going to get what your dream vision is at the end of the day. Then the next step, after you have your architect, you've got your design. Okay, now go find your contractor. You're going to have drawings that you can give your contractors. You're going to start getting bids. All of that stuff is going to start to come into vision at that point. Okay. Same thing as with your architect. Take your contractor out to the lot and get eyes on it, because they cannot give you an accurate bid. Sorry, I'm keeping my eyes on rocks here. They can't give you an accurate bid if they've never been to the lot. I don't care if they Google Earth it, it doesn't matter, because you don't know what the ground is like, you don't know how many rocks there are, you don't know, there might have been, these people use these hydro axes now, where they come in and they grind all the trees down at the ground, and it looks like it's just ground, but if you've got a bunch of 16 and 20 inch stumps ground off at the ground, your foundation cost just went up, because your contractor is going to have to go in and dig every last one of those out with a backhoe, and that's going to cause your cost to go up. By the way, that's another thing about looking at a piece of land. Make sure you don't have giant stumps everywhere where you want to build, because it's going to make your cost go up. But get that contractor out, get them familiar with the land, get them comfortable with it. And again, they should be excited about your vision. That's something that you need to see in your contractor and your architect. Everybody, they need to be excited about this. If they're not, if it feels like a job to them, go find somebody else. Then after you've chosen your builder, you've got your budget, you got your timeline and all that other stuff. Okay, now go find your lender and start working with lenders. And you've got the numbers. Start finding out, hey, how do you run your draw schedules? Everything that we've already talked about. Once you find your lender, then use your lender to double vet your builder. Use your builder to double vet your lender, okay? These are all things, look, until you sign contracts, you don't owe anybody anything. You can be all the way into the process, and when you get to a lender, your lender might go, dude, that builder ran off with $80,000 and has got lawsuits pending against him. Holy crap, okay, never mind, I'm going back to the builder phase and I'm gonna go find me a new builder, but I may have found my lender because I know that person's being honest at this point. So, again, this is kind of give and take, and you can probably tell, this isn't a short process. So make sure, again, if you get a loan on the land, make sure you've got enough time to do all of this. Make sure your balloon note isn't due after 1 year. Give yourself at least 3 if possible. But again, this is a long process, but it's going to be worth it in the end. When you think about when you walk out for the first time in the morning with a cup of coffee onto the back terrace, the back deck, whatever that you built, and you look out at whatever view that you have that you've always dreamt about, it's going to be worth it. So don't let all the minutia of this part of it wear you out or make you feel bad. Okay, it's going to be worth it, I'm telling you. And then once you have that lender, okay, that's when documents start getting signed, and that's when that construction process takes off, and that's when that reality starts setting in for you. And look, it's never going to be completely easy. This is it's not a simple process. Ask anybody who's ever built a house or a cabin or a barn, or it doesn't matter. If you've built something, you know that things are going to pop up. It's not going to be the smoothest situation. So again, don't get frustrated. You understand it going in. You know that there's going to be problems that arise. You just have to make sure you've got that team around you that you trust. If you've got a realtor, great. Your lender, you got to trust them. Your contractor, you got to trust them. And once you get to that point where you're trusting these people and you realize you don't have to do everything yourself, that's when that process, even when issues pop up, that's when the process just kind of feels a little bit easier, because you know that you're relying on other people that you've already vetted, that you trust, and that you realize that you can trust.